Hi, everybody. I'm Deborah Quilter, and I've written two books about repetitive strain injury. And today we're going to talk about how to do yoga safely if you have repetitive strain injury. Now, maybe you've heard that yoga is good for RSI, and you'd really like to try it, but you look a little bit nervous about aggravating your injuries. Or maybe you already do yoga or you've done it in the past and you really love it, but you tried to take a group class and found it that a lot of the things that were given aggravated your injury. So I have RSI and I'm also a yoga teacher. And I have taught other teachers how to teach people who have RSI at the Rocky Mountain School of Yoga and Ayurveda and other teacher trainings. And it's really important that you have someone skilled who's teaching you. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to find teachers who are really qualified to teach people with repetitive strain injury. But you can have them watch this video, and that will help them a lot. So let's talk about what you should and shouldn't do if you're going to practice yoga. Is yoga safe? Well, as one of my teachers put it depends. People didn't like that answer very much, but it's really a great answer. So here's what you and your teacher need to know. And let's just take a moment to talk about the many variations of repetitive strain injury. It's not simply carpal tunnel syndrome or an isolated thumb or elbow or shoulder pain. It refers to many syndromes that affect the upper extremity. You can see here carpal tunnel syndrome and de Quervain's disease, cubital tunnel syndrome, thoracic outlet syndrome, cervical radiculopathy, bicipital tendinitis, epicondylitis, infraspinatus syndrome, ganglion cysts, and more. So, most people have more than one ailment, so a teacher cannot assume that it's just your wrist that might be bothering you. And I was once criticized by some yoga teachers for talking about computer injuries when I was teaching them about yoga and RSI. They said it had nothing to do with yoga. Computer use had nothing to do with yoga. But I disagreed because most of the people who are coming to the yoga classes are probably doing really hand intensive jobs, including using computers and other sorts of activities. So, teachers need to consider the total amount of abuse the hands are taking at work or at play. Maybe they play the guitar or they play the piano or they do carpentry, use their hands in other ways. So, it's important to give the hands a break in class. The first rule of yoga is ahimsa. That means non harming. And it's often not emphasized in classes or even by private instructors. And what this means is ahimsa means that you won't do anything to hurt yourself during your practice. And you can assure this by staying with what is really, truly comfortable and easy for you, no matter what the teacher says. So now I'm going to talk about some warnings about taking group classes. So, the first thing I recommend, with very few exceptions, is to avoid group classes. Most yoga teachers are not knowledgeable about repetitive strain injury, and they can give you suggestions that can make your situation worse. They also might tell you to do what you can, but that's not helpful when the pose itself is contraindicated for people with RSI, such as just putting weight on your hands. And if you're in that position, you will be the odd man out. So when everyone else is doing cat curl or crow or something like that, if you join in, you know you're going to injure yourself. So it's important to realize that what's gentle for the teacher may be horrifically painful or dangerous for you. Just because the pose doesn't hurt them doesn't mean it won't hurt you. And that's a really important concept to keep in mind. It can be very irritating to be told that something won't hurt you, and when in fact it does. It just shows that the other person really doesn't understand repetitive strain injury. And then you're in the position of having to argue with the authority figure. And that's an unpleasant situation because the student usually wants to please the teacher and do what's given. So if you push, you can set yourself back in recovery for weeks. You could also get unwelcome comments from other members of the class because sometimes people come and they think it's like a regular gym class. So they'll comment on people who aren't doing what everybody else is doing, or aren't going as much, or aren't going as fast. And that can really be painful for somebody who just wants a moment of peace and relaxation from the yoga class. You also might bump into people who are trying to help you by offering useless or really misguided advice. And that can be also a conversation that you really don't want to have. I'd also encourage you to avoid advice about trying to perfect the pose. That means doing the pose the way you might see it on a magazine. This is really pointless. In my tradition, the perfect yoga pose was what was held in a calm and steady manner. Calm, relaxed, pain-free. So whatever is entirely comfortable for you is the perfect pose. That's the perfect pose. So I would also advise you to avoid going to the edge. Going to the edge, that's a popular piece of advice from a certain school of yoga. And I don't think that's really good either because if you go up to the edge, you're getting dangerously close to something that could be painful or injure you or, you know, lead to something where you're out of commission for a few days or a few weeks. So you don't want to do that either. It could take months of rehabilitation and, before you resume your practice. So I don't recommend that. Just do what's completely comfortable for you and grow that. That's a better plan because then you're reassuring your body that you're not going to hurt it. So it can relax and it'll give you a little bit more. And the other thing is never assume that the teacher knows more than you do about your body. You are living in your body and you know what your symptoms are and what aggravates them. So don't allow yourself to be persuaded by anyone else to go further than you think you should or do more than you think you should. Group classes can also get into this syndrome of other paced movements, and that can really get you into trouble because let's say you could do a pose if you could find your way into it, taking your own time, going safely, going slowly. But if you try to keep up with the teacher or the other people in the class, um, you can really get into trouble. And also, there's a lot of peer pressure to do what everyone else is doing, even if the teacher says not to. And even if you can do the pose, you might not be able to do it as quickly as the other people in class or as the teacher goes, and you could injure yourself trying to keep up. I remember one woman telling me that she was trying to keep up with her teacher, but she couldn't yet. This woman was about 65, and her teacher was probably in her 20s. Think about that. One person's body has been through a whole lot more than the young person's. And so, why would you try to keep up with someone who's decades younger than you? It just doesn't make sense. So, I really advised her to do what's appropriate for her own body. And remember, even classes that are billed as gentle yoga, they can be problematic because it might be super gentle for the teacher, but really excruciatingly painful and possibly dangerous for you. So you really have to use your own judgment here. Also, um, group classes, sometimes the teacher will feel the need to adjust you, and that means push you into a position or guide you into position, and that can be really troublesome. Let's see. Here, the teacher is pushing the student down into a pose, and it could put strain on her shoulders, strain on her hands, strain on her back. And here we have another very dangerous adjustment. This woman is not sitting on her sitting bones, so she's rounding her low back, and she's getting a very hefty pull from the teacher, which could, if she's got a shoulder injury, that could really set her off. So I really recommend, I mean, it's just better to say to the teacher, I don't want any adjustments. And then here we have a group class. And um, the thing about group situations is even if the teacher knew what to do appropriately, she can't keep her eye on every single student in the class all the time. So, for instance, the person in the back of the room is improperly placed with her elbows bent. And that kind of thing can lead to injury because, the teacher just, even if she knew, she can't keep her eye on everybody. So sometimes it's better to take private lessons. I'd also like to say that yoga is not a competition, but some people treat it that way, and it can lead to overexertion trying to keep up with the teacher and your fellow students. So I would avoid that. And it takes a lot of guts to roll up your mat and leave a class that's not right for you. But I really recommend that's what you do if you find yourself in that situation. It's a better plan to take private lessons with a teacher who may know nothing about RSI, but is at least willing to learn what they need to know and let you be the guide of what you can and cannot do. And in fact, you can recommend that your teacher watch this live stream so that they can educate themselves a little bit about how to deal with people with repetitive strain injury. Now, there are exceptions. I myself teach a yoga class. I teach a group yoga class, but I have taught each one of these students privately for quite a while. I know their health history, and I have given them modifications for their own body so that when they're in class, they knew how to take care of themselves and what to do that won't exacerbate their symptoms. I have also made an agreement with each one of my students that they will stop and go into shavasana or some other pose if something is uncomfortable. They can just stop and rest and wait and catch up later if they want to join, in another pose. And this is really important because I have to trust them that they'll take care of themselves in my class. I don't want them to hurt themselves in my class. So you will see my students doing all kinds of variations according to their own comfort, their own health history, their own body. And, sometimes they'll lie in shavasana or do a restorative pose on their own. And this pleases me very much. If you can find a teacher who will allow you to do only what you can comfortably and doesn't teach a class full of contraindicated poses, it can be really great to practice yoga in a group. It's kind of like singing in a choir. You get that nice group support and group energy. Otherwise, I really think it's better to do the practice on your own. This way, you can really focus on your own body's signals and listen to um, your own signals and go at your own pace. You won't feel any pressure from outside sources that way. So now let's look at some of the standard poses that we have in yoga classes. Starting with sun salute, um, we're going to talk about some of the problem poses here, and we'll look at some solutions both here and in the next section. But first, we'll start with sun salute because that's a very popular pose. You'll find it in many yoga classes, and it involves a number of contraindicated poses. It's, the overhead reach could be problematic. weight bearing on the hands during the lunge, up, down dog, upward facing dog, 8-point pose, and it's often done very quickly. So you don't really get a chance to place yourself in a good position, and that's really important. If your bones aren't aligned properly, you can really hurt the ligaments, the muscles, and everything else. So, overhead reaches and postures requiring upward reaches, such as the first movement of sun salute, can be painful for people with shoulder injuries. In fact, reaching for anything can be painful. So, until you have recovered to the point where overhead reaches are easy for you, lift your arms only as far as is completely comfortable or just leave them down. Now, here we have the next movement of sun salute, which is down dog, which places a lot of strain on the hands and shoulders. And I'm going to show you a variation that people give in class that I would advise you not to do. This woman is jumping into the pose. There's an enormous amount of force going through her hands and wrists and upper extremity. I'm going to show this again so you can see it. See the force? She's really landing almost her whole body weight on her hands. And she's also not in a proper position. So now here we have another person in what looks like um, plank pose or possibly getting into down dog. And she's kind of sagging on her shoulders, which isn't great. It looks to me like she's teaching herself how to do yoga online or following an online class. Now, that can be, um, it can be good in the sense that she can stop when she needs to or not skip a pose, but there's no skilled teacher guiding her. So there's nobody to tell her, hey, you really need to watch your shoulders when you're doing that pose. Um, we have Exploring Canada here. Hello, thank you for coming. Yes, we need a good healthy dose of common sense when we practice. Thank you for addressing this. You're welcome. So there's another problem, and it's really astonishing to people who don't have RSI, but it can be really exhausting to hold your arms up in Warrior Two. Um, it can be, people could have tingling or, all kinds of stuff going on. And the fatigue of the shoulders because they've been holding their arms out all day at the computer. So this could be really fatiguing. And there's an easy fix for this. When I'm teaching, I tell people just relax your arms by your sides. So you just bring your arms down to your thighs and then focus on the core strengthening aspect of that pose rather than holding your arms out. You could also try keeping them mobile, doing sort of wavy things, and that might help too. Now, here we have one of the hardest parts about um, yoga, which is weight bearing through the arms and hands. The hands are not weight bearing joints. The hands are not meant to be weight bearing joints. So look here. We have weight bearing in up dog. We have weight bearing in cat. We have weight bearing in crow. Now you can try, um, for instance, in cat, you can try using your fists, and that might work for some people, but it isn't recommended for everyone. And you can also do it seated. You can do a seated cat, just sit and round your back and lengthen. And I highly recommend, while we're on the topic, I highly recommend that you watch a video that I did with Robert Marcusson. He's the doctor that has a great mentor to me and a great friend of the channel. But he explains that this position of the hand, let me get myself here so that I can show you. The handshake position here, this is the functional position of the hand, where your hands are in a neutral position. The minute you flatten them, you strain this joint of the thumb, and it can lead to things like arthritis, strain on the basal thumb joint, strain on the tendon, all kinds of things. And think about the amount of force that's going through. A little bit of force here adds up to a lot of force there. So you really need to protect your thumb. And I highly recommend anybody watching go to my channel and search thumb. You'll find several videos that go into great detail explaining the vectors of force and all the things that are happening and why we need to protect this. Anybody with a thumb injury will know what I'm talking about. So, I'd like to say also that RSI is a cumulative trauma disorder. So it doesn't happen overnight. And the same sorts of things that you're doing without thinking about in yoga class could eventually lead to an injury. So think about what you're doing. It may not hurt you today, the same way that you could use computers for years or do the same repetitive motion for years before the fatigue and the damage and the injury finally catch up to you. So really it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so let's switch this out. So here we have crow, a lot of weight on those wrists, a lot of weight on the upper extremity. And again, in a variation of wheel. They're very pretty poses. I mean, these are gorgeous poses. They look like a lot of fun. And I'm sure they're a lot of fun, if you're 15 or 16. Even side plank, that's a lot of weight on your wrist and hand and shoulder. And you really need to be perfect. Now here, she's sitting in Dandasana, and that is, pretty benign. She doesn't have a lot of weight on her hand, but look at the angle of her wrist. She's really stretching her median nerve there. And it's just not, yeah, I would definitely move my hands if I were she. Okay, so let's talk about poses that involve binding, grasping, or pulling. And they can be such as holding your big toe in standing or side lying, um, uh, cow facing pose, a leg cradle, and it like this pose here, the cow facing pose can be too strong a stretch for people with a rotator cuff or just general lack of range of motion. And it can be modified with a yoga strap, but even that requires a lot of really careful preparation. I'm going to show you another video that looks pretty benign, but actually requires a lot of effort. So here she is, she's holding up her leg. And, it might look easy, but in fact, it takes energy. And if you're weak, you can feel a strain when you're holding up your body part like that. So here we have another bound pose where her arms are behind her. And, if somebody's got a shoulder issue, that could be a lot. Plus, the grasping could be really hard for somebody. Another pose, beautiful pose. But there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of twisting of that shoulder and then holding up the foot. Here, another nice pose, but it could it could be a problem for somebody with repetitive strain injury holding up their foot like that. I remember one of my teachers telling me, well, there's hardly any weight in my hands. But in fact, it hurt me to try to do that. So he didn't understand RSI because it didn't feel like a lot for him. And you can also strain the nerves around the elbows. Some people, if you've got cubital tunnel, it's painful and not good for you to keep stretching the nerve over the elbow. They also can take a lot of strength to get in and out of these poses. And if you're bracing for a fall, that could lead to pain. So, plow could be problematic for the same reason as shoulder stand. And headstand isn't really a good idea, in my opinion. A lot of people agree with me on that point. So, here, there's poses that also require you to lie on your hands. This is a variation of locust where your hands are definitely underneath your torso, and that can be painful. Um, this is a variation that was actually suggested for people with RSI. It's called the wounded bird. So you get into external rotation and then you roll onto your back and lie there. Now, if you've got the shoulder mobility to do that and it doesn't bother you, um, that's one way to go. But I think for most people, it's a pose that they ought to really be careful about doing. And here we have another variation of fish where you can do it without your hands underneath you. You just keep your hands by your side. But here's another case where you would be putting your body weight on your hands. Now, there are also poses that can be problematic if you fall. And um, here's one pose that's kind of astonishing. Let me get it back up there. She's not holding on to anything apparently. And, you know, uh, just don't want to think about the consequences on that one. And here, beautiful pose. And if you've got great balance and you like doing these kinds of poses that are so geometrically interesting, fine. But if you fall, you're going to brace yourself with your hands. So um, I think, just avoiding problems in the first place would be better. Here's some poses that require your hands to get into them. So you've got to put a lot of weight on your upper extremity in order to get into this pose. And again, inversions can be problematic because of the chance of falling. And if you don't do them properly, they can create a great deal of strain on your neck. And there are other ways of doing inversions without so much risk, and we'll get to those in a minute. So you also want to avoid overstretching nerves. And now here in this supine twist, um, if you don't have nerve injuries, this is a wonderful, beautiful pose. But some people get tingling and all kinds of things when they're in a twist. So obviously, that's not the great thing for them. You need to be in a twist where there's absolutely no pressure on the nerves. And okay, so we get to the final pose of class, which is Shavasana or corpse pose. And what could possibly be wrong with this? Well, there's one variation that I really suggest that you avoid. Don't do the version where you progressively tense the muscles. Because if you're making a fist and lifting your hands and squeezing like mad and then letting them drop to the floor, it's not going to be comfortable for you. It might hurt you. So do something else. And also, some people aren't comfortable lying with their palms up. It's recommended because the fingertips are so sensitive. And if you're going into pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, you want to avoid, um, the stimulation of the fingertips. But it might be painful for you to keep your palms up until you get a little bit more opening of your shoulders. Then we have mudras. And again, what could possibly be difficult about this? Well, for somebody with RSI, it could be stressful to hold a mudra. So it's perfectly acceptable if you just let your hands rest on your knees, either palms up or palms down, while you are meditating. So here we have some general guidelines. And bear in mind that you're going to be different from everybody else. So I'm giving general guidelines here. First thing is listen to your inner teacher. That's your own self. A movement that might be fine for a healthy person might be contraindicated for you. So discontinue any posture that causes pain, soreness, or exacerbates your symptoms. Now, if you're going to do yoga, I recommend doing things that strengthen your back, like this variation of locust. Now, she's lifting her body up, but she's not resting on her hands. She's not binding her hands. She's just doing what's comfortable, strengthening her back with her neck in good posture. Here's if you can do it without falling, here's a nice balance pose that will be very strengthening for you. Another nice balance pose. If it bothers you to put your hands in Anjali Mudra with the palms together, you can do something else. So, strengthening the whole body um, is really ideal. What you want to do is get a holistic practice because if the rest of your body is strong, it diminishes the need for your hands. You don't have to hoist yourself out of a chair or do things. And plus, if you improve one function, other functions improve. So, being able to do a good yoga practice will make you feel better. And if you feel better, usually your RSI feels better too. So it's a really good idea to do um, a good practice as much as you can. You can strengthen your abdominal and leg muscles. Here's a nice variation for meditation. And I love twists. If it doesn't bother you, you can also support the twist. We're going to talk about the 70% rule. Some people say it should be 50 or 60, and I agree. Uh, the 70% rule is a Taoist tradition. You'll find it in Tai Chi and Qigong. And advocates, when they use only 70% of your maximum effort, it allows you to do an activity in a relaxed fashion that reduces rather than increases internal stress. So eventually, this allows you to do more at 70% than you would have been able to do at 100% easily. So if you keep staying within that 70%, just going where it's, just a little bit, if you keep doing that, you will grow that and eventually be able to do more. It's a great practice. I would also recommend that you pay attention to how you feel the next day because that will tell you whether you did too much. Here's a nice variation on cobra, no hands. You can squeeze your shoulder blades together and get more oomph out of it that way. Child's pose is wonderful. There's variations. Boat pose is good. Very strengthening for the abdominals. Now here's a variation of plank. He's on his elbow, and this might be okay for some people because you're not on your wrist and you're on your forearm instead. But not if you've got cubital tunnel syndrome. So this is one of those maybe poses. Might be right for you, might not. Chair pose, but maybe you need to keep your arms down. Side angle pose, but maybe it'll bother you to rest on your thigh like that or keep your arm up. You could keep your arm by your thigh, the top arm down. Just look at ways to vary the pose so it doesn't hurt you. Now here we get to restorative yoga, which is really the best kept secret in yoga. It's amazing how healing it can be to lie in a comfortable pose and breathe. In restorative yoga, there are props that are holding you in the pose, so you don't have to use any effort. Now, for some people, the stillness won't be right. Um, it's an interesting uh, phenomenon. For some people, movement causes pain, and for other people, stillness does. So, in the beginning, when I'm getting to know a student, we go with what's the easiest one for them. And then later, we can introduce the other quality when they're ready for it. So, maybe they need to move a lot and then they can be still, or maybe they need to be still for a long time before they can be comfortable moving. It depends on the student. So, you want to listen to that person. Here's Supta Baddha Konasana, and it's a lovely pose. It's very nice for pregnant women. They really love it. And you're basically, your thighs and knees are being supported by zafus or cushions or rolled up blankets. You're lying over a bolster. Your head is supported. Your arms are out. So it's a great way of opening the chest. Here's another great pose. I call it the couch trick. And if you search my channel, you'll find instructions on how to do this. I prefer a couch to a chair because you can put the back of your thigh right up against the couch and really make a right angle. You put a strap around your thighs, and your legs are not together. The knees are about a fist width apart. And then you just put something on your belly, and that calms your breath. And then put on an eye pillow, and you can support your arms if you need to. And you can just lie there for a long time. It's very healing, very wonderful pose. Here's another pose I love. This is a good inversion. So if you're not up to doing shoulder stand, I recommend legs up the wall. Again, you put the strap midway around your thigh, keep your legs apart. It looks like mine are together, but they're not. And then just let your arms relax in an open position. And this one I made up. This is the ironing board trick. That's an ironing board that I've covered with a blanket. And I make a right angle. And this is wonderful for lengthening the hamstrings, relaxing the shoulders. You can move your arms around to wherever they're comfortable. You can also bring one leg back and lengthen um, your calf muscles. It's really a lovely pose. It was fun when I did that the first time. And the thing about ironing boards is that you can get them to exactly the right height. So you want it to be where your hip folds at a right angle, and there's a small curve in your spine. Breathing can be absolutely miraculous. There are many breathing practices that um, are so helpful for repetitive strain injury. You can just sort of melt pain away. It's really it's really a wonderful practice to do. What I recommend is the gentle breathing. So instead of doing things like breath of fire, which I try to avoid, I think it's too much for most people. Do Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing, where you're breathing in one nostril and out the other, and vice versa. There's many variations on that. Or just letting the breath come and go into the belly, just gently lying there, not doing anything, not forcing your breath, just breathing easily can be wonderful. And you can send the breath, like if you have a headache or something, you can send the breath up there and it can melt the pain away. It's just really amazing once you learn how to do that. So I'd like to emphasize that these are general statements. Um, Everybody's a little different. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments. But I really encourage you to listen to your own body. I've said it a million times, and just you'll find your way. And yoga can be so healing. Um, I've seen it happen with so many people that as they begin to heal, a pose that they couldn't do a few weeks ago, they can easily do now. And it's because we took time. We didn't rush. We went at the student paces. And so that's what I would recommend to you. And also, remember that the whole purpose of yoga asana is to prepare the body for meditation. So you don't have to feel these aches and pains while you're trying to meditate. And it's traditionally a spiritual practice. So the value of meditation and contemplation can't be overemphasized. And you can also practice other forms of yoga that don't involve any asana at all. You know, you can do practice the yamas and niyamas. Those are the yoga philosophies. You can study yoga scripture, practice karma yoga, yoga of action, selfless service, all these other things that are very helpful and beneficial. So that's all I have for today. So if you have any questions, you can ask me now, or you can drop them in the comments. I read all the comments and I can cover them in the comments. The other thing I'd like to announce is that we have coming up the next live stream will be covering studies. So we're going to be doing that March 18th. I think it's at 4 o'clock. So you can join us then. Here we go. We're going to be looking at some studies that are useful and some studies that I wish people would do. And if you have any ideas, you can let me know. And finally, I hope that everybody will consider signing the petition for a repetitive strain injury patient Bill of Rights. That's on change.org. And we've had a lot of signatures from all over the world. So, but the more we have, the more chance we have of actually getting some legislation that will help encourage people to create safer tools and give the doctors enough time to really do a good, solid evaluation. It's a very comprehensive document. So if you haven't read it, please go to change.org and um, do that, and you'll educate yourself. Tell your friends you don't have to have RSI to to sign. And let's see, we've got Exploring Canada. Thank you, very helpful. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming in the replay. And we will see you next time.